afternoon. It's 12 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started with our Women at Ardent March webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we're going to be celebrating Women's History Month with this webinar, Leadership Lessons from Women in History. I'm Meredith Maynard. I'm the Director of Quality here at the Utica Park Clinic in Tulsa, and I've had the honor to serve on the Women at Ardent Steering Committee, and I'm excited to be here with all of you today. Before we begin, I'd like to just review a couple of housekeeping notes. As you know, if you've previously attended a Women at Ardent webinar, all lines are muted, but we encourage you to interact with our speaker and each other via the chat function. At the end of the presentation, we will answer your questions. If this is your first Women at Ardent webinar, we will welcome you and are glad you have joined us today. Now, when you get ready to exit the webinar today, you're going to be redirected to a post-session survey. Please complete this survey. It helps us plan for future webinars. Feel free to give feedback to the presenters. That's always nice to hear. As a reminder, Women at Ardent's purpose is to network with and learn practical solutions from Ardent's own women leaders, sharing our industry knowledge and leadership experience. The goal is to support all women in our organization to overcome gender barriers and prepare themselves for leadership opportunities. For our Connect to Purpose today, we're going to recognize Dr. Jamie Rempe. She's an obstetrician and gynecologist at the University of Kansas Health System at the St. Francis Campus Women's Center. Dr. Rempe has shown her commitment to her patients and their families through the personalized quality care she gives to each. Every relationship Dr. Rempe develops with her patients is unique and very special to her. Her approachability and welcoming nature creates an environment where her patients feel comfortable and at ease. Throughout her patient's journey, she is there for them and works to find a solution together. More than anything, she wants her patients to be as involved as possible in their healthcare decisions. She shares, "I tell expecting moms to trust in their healthcare provider. If they don't have trust, then they may not be seeing the right person for them because they should believe their obstetrician or midwife has the best possible intentions for them and their baby." Thank you, Dr. Rempe, for your dedication to caring for patients and the positive impact you have on them. To share stories of great women throughout history, we have three very special speakers with us today. Dr. Emily Grewe-Nelson is a physician at our Utica Park Clinic in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She is dual board certified in family medicine and has a special interest in women's health. She attended undergrad at the University of Dallas, and then she received her medical degree from the Oklahoma State University College of Osteopathic Medicine in Tulsa in 2014. Dr. Julie Philley is our second presenter. She's the Executive Vice President of Health Affairs for the University of Texas at Tyler. She is a native East Texan, growing up in Overton and returning to Tyler in 2012 to continue her research efforts in pulmonary disease. And our final panelist, Carolina Morris, is the Director of Business Relations at Utica Park Clinic. She has been with Ardent since 2010 and is the chairperson of the DEI Council for Hillcrest Healthcare System. Thank you all for joining us today. Dr. Philley, I'm going to turn it over to you to begin.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be with you today. You know, when I was asked to talk about women that make an impact, I kind of thought about my own career and thought about the woman that I might choose. When I was growing up, I always wanted to be a doctor and never really thought that was possible. So I thought the next best thing would be if I could marry a doctor. That never happened for me, but somewhere along the way, I read a quote by Gloria Steinem that said, "Some of us are becoming the men we wanted to marry." And that quote has always hung around with me very closely. And I've always kind of admired Gloria Steinem for some of her work, some of it, not all of it. And I thought to choose her. And then I thought maybe that's a little more controversial, and I didn't want to get into the feminist talk. So I thought, well, let me do something a little more touchy-feely like Florence Nightingale. And let me tell you, if you do your homework on Florence, you'll realize that women throughout history have been paving the way and have been very committed to their careers. So I'm actually loved learning more about Florence Nightingale. We think of her as the mother of modern nursing. A lot of people know her as the lady with the lamp because she rounded on so many on so many men during the night during the war. But Florence Nightingale was born in 1820. She was a British nurse, a social reformer. We know her as a statistician, and she's the founder of modern nursing. But what you may not know is that she was actually born in Italy to incredibly wealthy parents. She then moved to England at the time and created a lot of hubbub with her family because she wanted to actually go into nursing. And they said that is just an absolute terrible thing. You should be an aristocratic wife, and be like your mother was. Her father was a very wealthy landowner. He owned multiple homes, and so it was a big disappointment that she wanted to be a nurse, but she did it anyways. So it made me think about the things about our careers which we need to do. And if we'll go to the next slide, the first one that you should do is honor your commitment. I think it's important that we remember that our careers are important to us, and the work that we do on this planet is to make a difference. I put this picture on here because Florence Nightingale refused the marriage proposal of a very wealthy gentleman for reasons clearly related to her career, and that is she thought that being his wife was going to keep her from doing what she thought was her calling in life. I think it's important as we always progress and move up or move down in life that we honor the commitment we make to our work. Our work is incredibly important. So next slide. The second thing that's important, and I apologize, this is the wrong picture. I put this picture on here because this is actually one of the homes of Florence Nightingale's parents that she could have lived in and grown up in and continued to have long after her work. But the second thing that Florence Nightingale taught us is to utilize our resources. She became a nurse, and in October of 1853, the Crimean War broke out, which was the war of the British Empire against the Russian Empire for control of the Ottoman Empire. And thousands of British soldiers were very sick and very ill during this time, both from war, wounds, cholera, and typhoid. 18,000 of them had been admitted to a hospital, and they called and said they needed help. So the first thing they did was call Florence Nightingale, who utilized her resources. She called 34 women, and they went to the war area and began to work. I think it's really important. This still applies to us today. Times are tough. Resources are lean. There's a lack of help. We need more. The hiring market is terrible. But I think the thing that Florence Nightingale taught us is you can do a lot with a little. And if you call on your social circle and your family and your work partners, you can accomplish a lot by simply just utilizing your resources. So she assembled a team of 34 women. She took advantage of other people's ideas. She was a steward of supplies, and they went to the war. Next slide. During this time, she showed up, and what she found was absolutely appalling. She wrote about it. She showed up, it was dirty. There was completely unsanitary conditions, both inside of the hospital and outside of the hospital. There were tons of people sick from typhoid. The smell was something that was so bad. She writes about that in a lot of her post work, that they still could smell the smell of rotting flesh long after they had the area. And she was just no nonsense. She just assembled a small group of women, 34, set quickly to work. They cleaned the entire hospital. They moved soldiers into areas that were off of the floor. They got rid of the rats. They utilized the supplies that they had and requested more. They quickly took care of the men that were dying and made them comfortable. And she worked endlessly throughout the night. And these soldiers would actually ask for her and say, "Where's the woman with the lamp?" And I don't know about you, but when the going gets tough, I think about how helpful it is to have a job and to give back and to focus on something other than what you're going through every day. And so I think Florence Nightingale definitely was a person that taught us that. Her work actually helped us, that during the war to reduce deaths by two-thirds, just with those efforts. Next slide. Other interesting facts about her is that she got a fever. We don't know which type, but she never fully recovered. By the time she was 38, she was homebound, bedridden, and she never changed after that. She continued to work from her bed and lived a very long life, writing, doing research, and helping the nursing field. And she was conferred the Medal of Honor by King Edward during that time. She passed away in 1910, but her legacy lives on through so many different facets of the things that she's changed. Again, honoring the commitment to do the job that you know that you need to do, and that your career is important, and that you will actually change your life, whether it be for money or for marriage or for other things, and give up things because your career is important to you, to utilize the resources around you. Sometimes that's just gathering a really strong group of women together to formulate ideas and make plans. And then the third thing is that when times get tough, and we still live in times today that are tough, to go to work. I think those are things that Florence Nightingale taught us and that we can learn from. And so with that, I'll pass it the baton to I think it's Carolina.
Thank you, Dr. Philley. This is Meredith, and we will go right to Carolina. Great insight on one of the icons of nursing, and thank you for sharing her story. Carolina is now going to share with us about Harriet Tubman.
Thank you, Meredith, and thank you, Dr. Philley, for sharing your story. I love hearing how, we can connect to women in history. And when I was doing my research on who my woman in history was that I could, lessons learned and things I could most relate to, I chose Harriet Tubman. And I want to just share a couple of facts about her with you, and then I want to share some quotes, and then 3 lessons that I feel like have been pivotal moments in my life that hopefully you all can apply in yours. So Harriet Tubman was born in 1820. She's most famous for being known as the conductor of the Underground Railroad, and for those of you that don't know, it was a network of underground routes and safe houses that guided slaves to freedom in the late 1800s. And because of her work in freeing slaves, she actually became a soldier and a spy for the Union Army. And that, all of her work in the Union Army led her to become the first woman to lead an armed military operation known as the Combahee Ferry Raid. And as I read more about that, I thought it was interesting. It was a raid where herself and African-American Union soldiers rescued more than 700 slaves. So there's some misconception that people thought, oh, she freed all these slaves through the Underground Railroad, but that was actually a more tough and grueling job than the raid was, because she had a lot of help. But her courageous work proved herself to be invaluable at gathering intelligence, forming allies, and avoiding capture. Like I said, there's so many valuable life lessons that can be gained from Harriet Tubman, not only in our professional lives, but personal as well. And I want to share, if you go to the next slide, one of the first quotes that resonated with me. If you hear the dogs, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If they're shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop. Keep going. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going. If you go to the next slide. So lesson number 1, stay the course no matter what. I recall the last year of my master's program, I became pregnant, which was totally unplanned. And at the time, I was in the community health education program, and you could either take a test or write a thesis. And I remember I met with my advisor at the time, and he said, Carolina, you should just take the test due to your condition. And of course, I gave him a look like, condition? Needless to say, I requested a new advisor and defended my master's thesis 8 months pregnant, which I don't recommend, but the point is, whatever your course is, there will be obstacles any which way you turn, but you just keep going, just like Harriet Tubman did. There'll be times when you don't have a clue what you're doing or how you're going to get there, but you just keep going. I mean, just like Harriet, she didn't let anything get in her way of getting these slaves to freedom. If you can only imagine the obstacles she encountered, but she tackled them one at a time. I mean, she did extraordinary things. Like, the more I read about her, I learned that she would drug babies and young children so their cries wouldn't be heard as they made their escape. And they chose to make their escape during the winter because there were longer nights and they could cover more ground. I mean, she knew which authorities took bribes, how to communicate with them to gather intelligence. She was also illiterate and she couldn't write anything down, so she learned to commit everything to memory, which I think is incredible because if you tell me something, I forget like the next second. So next slide. The next quote that resonated with me was this: "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." So the second lesson is, if there is no path, pave it yourself. From the time I was young, I encountered many situations that I had no path, or there was no path or example to follow. Both of my parents were immigrants and everything was foreign to them. The school system, academics, athletics, heck, even just being in the United States was foreign to them. But freedom was common ground that they both understood, and that is what inspired me to pave my own road to freedom or success. I knew I wanted to go to college. My parents made it clear they couldn't afford it, so I created my own path to get there. Throughout high school, I gathered intelligence. I began to notice that, hey, if you play sports, that can pay for college. So my journey began. I became the first female football player and pole vaulter at my high school, which in turn landed me a full ride athletic scholarship, where I became the first female pole vaulter at my college. I was also the first generation high school grad and college grad in my family. So the point is, there are times when you have ideas, and while they may seem crazy and outrageous or even unobtainable, you just try. You put yourself out there. You reach. You figure it out. You pretend like you know what you're doing until you get there. So if there is no path, you make it. You set your own standard, and just maybe others will follow. Just like Harriet, she wasn't okay with just being a slave. She wasn't okay with others being slaves. She came up with a plan. She didn't copy anyone or read a manual. She developed her own plan and executed. She did it with such precision and confidence that people had no choice but to want to follow her to freedom. And the last slide, last quote that really touched me is, every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. So my last lesson is, you are enough if you want to be. Early on in my career, and I remember an internal manager position opened up, and I thought, why not? I'll apply for it, try to gain more experience, pad my resume. I was fresh out of school, and at the time we had a small team of about 6 people, and the tenured employee, more experienced, thought she would automatically get the position. I remember she went around the office talking a big game, like, when I'm the manager, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. So I quietly prepared my game plan. I was never a manager, never had staff that reported to me, but I knew I had what it took. I knew that I was enough. So the point is, there are times when you will second guess yourself personally and professionally, but if you know you are enough, you know you have what it takes, you can get there. You can accomplish great things. I mean, I know it sounds cliche, like believe in yourself, but really, you have to believe in yourself. You have to be your own hype person. And by the way, I did end up getting that manager role, which helped pave the way for other roles I was able to obtain. So in closing, reflecting back on Harriet Tubman, I picture her being this little bitty lady walking around with the stature of a 6'5" linebacker, like no one was getting in her way of what she wanted to get done, and she for sure proved that. She was fearless, courageous, she was quiet and humble, she was persistent, and she displayed extraordinary discipline and knew what she had to do to get the job done. And with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Grewe-Nelson.
Thank you so much, Carolina. So my presentation is going to be on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I actually wore my shirt that has her collar on it as a tribute to her. What really inspired me to talk about her in this speech is several years ago I was speaking to my grandmother, and we were speaking about having children and careers and everything. And she said kind of offhandedly, well, you know, of course I had a career, and then I got pregnant with your father, who's her oldest child. And of course I had to quit after that. And to her at the time, it was such a given that this is what women did. Of course, you can't continue working once they find out that you're pregnant and you're expected to leave after you deliver. And then in learning more about that, I found that one of the people who was really instrumental in making sure that that changed was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I threw some quotes in here too. She was asked several times, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? Of course, she was the second woman on the Supreme Court ever. And her answer was always, when there are 9. And people were always shocked by that, but there had been 9 men on the court and nobody ever questioned that. If you'll go ahead to the next slide, Meredith. So a little bit about her background. She was born in New York City. She grew up very close to her mother. Her mother was very passionate about Ruth's education, and her mother was ill early on in her life and then passed away on the day of her high school graduation from cervical cancer. And that really shaped her life as well. She worked hard to live up to the standards that her mother had for her on her education. She met and married her husband, Marty Ginsburg. And then after college, they lived in Oklahoma for a while, which is my home state. And she worked for the Social Security Administration before going to law school while he was in the military. And she found out she was pregnant with her first child. She was excited. She told her coworkers, and she was quickly demoted. And she was kind of thrown aback by that and ended up later with her second child. She didn't tell anyone until she was about to deliver. And then she was, of course, expected to quit after she had her child. She then attended Cornell for undergrad. She went on to Harvard Law School. She was one of 9 women in Harvard Law School, and there are several things in her story about that. She was invited to a dinner at one point with the dean where they had to go around the room and say why they felt like they could take the position of a man at the law school. She later transferred to Columbia. She tried to get Harvard to allow her to finish up her law degree from Harvard in New York when Marty got a job in New York, and they said no, so she ended up transferring to Columbia, and she graduated at the top of her class. And if you'll go ahead to the next slide. So this is actually her in her gym. She famously was very into working out even late in her life. And this is actually a quote from an abolitionist. She quoted Sarah Grimke in one of her dissents, or I'm sorry, not one of her dissents, in one of her arguments in front of the Supreme Court before she was a justice. I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off of our necks. If you'll go to the next slide. So then in her early career, one of the first things she did was she actually lived in Sweden for a while. She co-authored a book on civil procedure in Sweden. And at the time, Sweden was a bit more of a progressive society than the United States. So she got to have some firsthand experience of what a more equal society looks like. Not a perfectly equal society, but a more equal society. And that shaped her career path some as well. She became a law professor at Rutgers. She was told when she took the job that she was going to be paid less than her male colleagues, just told outright. And they told her, it's because your husband has a very good job. She asked if the bachelors were paid more than her as well, and she was told yes, they were also paid more than her. She joined the ACLU. She co-founded the Women's Rights Project. She argued 6 gender discrimination cases at the Supreme Court. She won 5 of them. In total, she worked on 300 gender discrimination cases at her time there. If you have had your children on your health insurance, taken maternity leave, or even not gotten fired or promoted while being pregnant, then you have benefited from her work that she did in her early career. Those were all things that she worked on during her time at the ACLU and in those cases that she presented in front of the Supreme Court. And to me, it's just amazing how much of an impact she's had on our society and on women in the workplace. Interestingly, she used cases in which men were discriminated against to make her point that women were treated as less valuable to society. And her approach was to teach the justices what it was like to be a woman using a man who was discriminated against, and it ended up working quite well for her. If you'll go to the next slide. So this is another quote from her: "Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." I think people know her for her kind of fiery dissents, but not all of her dissents were like that. In fact, a lot of times she would write dissents on when she was in the Supreme Court, and just in the way that she wrote them, she would end up convincing other justices to join her side. She's actually flipped decisions that way in the past. If you'll go to the next slide, we'll talk more about her time on the court. So she was nominated in 1993 by Bill Clinton. And 1993, of course, was not too terribly long ago. She was only the second female justice on the Supreme Court. And then when Sandra Day O'Connor, when she retired, she was the only female justice for a while at that time. So it wasn't too terribly long ago that we didn't have any female justices on the court. She continued her strategy of changing minds one step at a time. She was very procedural like in the way that she would go about making change. She wanted to teach people so that it would give enduring change rather than just, push her opinion through. She believed in treating her opponents with dignity. She wouldn't make a personal attack in her dissents. And then, like I said, some of the dissents that she wrote ended up flipping the vote in her favor prior to the ruling. One of the other things I think we can learn from her is, work well with others and save those really fiery opinions for when all other options are exhausted and the stakes are high. And that's what she did. There was a point in her career where there were more of these kind of spicy dissents, and I think that's what a lot of people remember. But there were several times where it was more to try and change minds, and she did that quite well. She often warned against growing polarization of the court as well. And then another thing is, in the early 2010s, she was really pushed to retire, and she pushed back on that quite a bit. And I think as women, we can appreciate that she did push back on that because, we've all seen women get pushed out of positions as they age. And she was not done yet. She was not done with her work. And so she pushed back on those calls to retire about 10 years ago. If you'll go to the next slide for me. So here's another quote: "Women belong in all places where decisions are being made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception." And then next slide again. So lessons that we can learn from her: be strategic, know your audience, work with where your audience is and try and get them to understand your position, try and teach your position, have a clear goal and work towards it with unrelenting passion. She was famous for staying up late nights, getting very little sleep, which, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that part of it, but she was very passionate in her work. Treat your opponents with respect, don't burn your bridges, fight in a way that will lead others to join you, as she famously said. And then become a mentor, clear the way for other women. She had multiple female clerks. She welcomed the other women who ended up sitting with her on the Supreme Court. And she was always a champion of women, not just from the standpoint of arguing cases for them, but of also welcoming and then have a sense of humor too. There are some things that you just have to laugh off. So, and with that, I will send it back to Meredith.
Thank you, Dr. Grewe-Nelson. Thank you, Carolina and Dr. Philley. Some of these stories we might have heard bits and pieces of in the past, and it was very interesting. Your take on each of these individuals and the inspiration that they provide for us. And if I can only say for a second, the inspiration that all three of you yourselves are for us, who I'm sure Florence Nightingale would have never guessed that a panel of women physicians and administrators would be leading a group like this, and so that is very exciting to take part of and reflect on. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll discuss those really quick for the next couple of minutes. And it looks like we do have a question for any speaker who's willing to chime in here. It seems like these women all stayed laser focused on their goals to be successful, doing whatever it takes. How do you do that in a corporate setting with bureaucracy and rules? Anyone want to take that question on?
Meredith, this is Carolina. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so one of my mottos, and Jim, don't kill me for saying this, is just keep going until someone tells you no. Like really, if you have an idea, and that's what I love about working in this organization, is if you have an idea and can formulate your strategy and opinion, present it and go for it. I mean, and obviously within reason, right? You're not going to break rules and that kind of thing, but I just keep going until someone tells me I can't do that.
I like that about Carolina. Having worked with her personally, she definitely takes the task at hand and moves it forward. Dr. Philley or Dr. Grewe-Nelson, would you like to comment on that same question? How you worked on being laser focused to be successful, and how to do that in a corporate setting? Dr. Philley?
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, especially the part about bureaucracy. I've found I can get a lot more done with a smaller team. And sometimes you do have to, socialize ideas and get buy-in. And then other times you actually have to have a plan and a timeline and just go for it. I think we do get bogged down with unnecessary meetings and a lack of vision for when we should accomplish things. And so setting appropriate timelines and holding people accountable is helpful.
A couple things that kind of have helped me. One is, don't be afraid to speak up. If you have an idea, speak up, and the worst that somebody can do is tell you no. Don't be afraid to speak your mind. The other is really sitting down and realizing, what are my goals? What are my short-term goals? What are my long-term goals? And then figure out steps to work towards those things. And especially, as life gets busy and everything, it can be hard to fit in things for your career with family life and all of that. If you have a clear picture of what your goal is in 5 years and 10 years, and you have steps that you can take to do that, you can work within the bureaucracy and within the system to make steps to get to those goals and to make change.
And a lot of what you brought up in your presentation, Dr. Grewe-Nelson, about being patient with those and working through those situations. Sometimes hard, but a really great approach. I have another question. What has been your experience as a strong woman? Have you ever been perceived as harsh or bossy when you've exhibited the same tone or behavior as your male counterparts? How do you handle that?
I'll jump in on this one. The answer to that is all the time. And I think that you have to beat people at their own game and understand your audience, understand when it's appropriate to be a little more firm, but then when it's appropriate to be seen as someone that understands is a little more soft. But I do think women have to play a different game just by definition than men do, or they do. You can be perceived as one of those. And once that happens, it can be a very difficult situation to turn that boat around.
And then a follow-up question, what can we do to support other women who are being judged harshly? Maybe we're in a setting together, or you've observed this. Carolina or Dr. Grewe-Nelson, some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I agree with Dr. Philley that, knowing your audience is key. Sometimes you have to make that split-second decision in a meeting or, wherever you're at to know, like, is this the time that the lion comes out, or does the quiet little mouse stay put? And so I think that, and then the other thing is just having empathy too. I think that's important, really understanding personalities of your counterparts, your colleagues, the situation you're going into. I think that adds a lot of value that can give you kind of another aspect of being a strong woman.
Thank you, Carolina. Dr. Grewe?
I would agree that knowing when to get angry and when to be more diplomatic is a hard line to walk. So when do you bring out that firmness, and when do you try and get people to your side in a gentler way? And that's one of the things that inspired me about my subject as well. As far as how to support other women, I think mentoring is a big thing. Supporting when you're in a position of power where you can make a difference as far as if somebody gets promoted, supporting the women who are on there, and also noticing within yourself, do I tend to do those things and see other women as bossy when really they're just leaders? Do I have some of that internalized misogyny that I need to address in myself too? I think that becomes an issue, and we can all probably introspect a bit and find some things that we do that maybe aren't helping other women and address those things within ourselves.
That is a very valid point, and I think you're right. Self-reflection on where our own biases lie is very important. We think we are all women, so we all feel the same way, and there's a lot of times that we portray some of those same behaviors, so thank you for sharing that. Well, that's all the questions. So just to kind of summarize what we've done today, these are just incredible lessons we've learned today from women throughout history. Thank you again, Carolina Morris, Dr. Julie Philley, and Dr. Emily Grewe-Nelson for being here and sharing such powerful stories of women throughout history. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule, not only to present, but to also prepare, and I really appreciate that. So for the rest of our listeners, please use the QR code to complete the post-session survey, or you can click the link on the WebEx in the WebEx chat. This survey helps us plan for future sessions in terms of topics and speakers, as well as suggestions about how women at Ardent can better support you. Looking forward, we are excited to announce our April Women at Ardent webinar that is scheduled on a new day of the week. It will be on Thursday, April 28th. Be watching for those emails to register. We will be welcoming a member of the Ardent Board of Directors, Ellen Havdallah, to discuss management strategies, which is always a hot topic, I know. And so be on the lookout for more information coming out about our April webinar. Thank you so much for taking time out of the middle of your day and attending today's session. We will email the recording of the webinar and related resources next week. If you enjoyed the program, please tell your friends and coworkers and encourage them to attend as well. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend.